There are some photographs that define history, but there are very few photographs that redefine what it means to be human. In December 1972, a grainy, black and white photo was released to the press. It showed a group of young men. They were bearded, skeletal, and sunburnt. They were hugging each other. They were smiling. They were standing in the snow, next to the twisted wreckage of a plane fuselage. The world cheered. It was a miracle. They had survived 72 days in the Andes Mountains. The miracle of the Andes, the headline screamed. But then the world looked closer at the photo. They looked at the ground around the survivors. They saw bones. They saw strips of meat drying on the fuselage. And the question changed from how did they survive to what did they eat? The answer was a secret the survivors had made a pact to keep. A secret so dark, so taboo, and so desperate that it challenged the very laws of religion and morality. They hadn't eaten rations. They hadn't eaten animals. They had eaten their friends. This is the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. It is the greatest survival story ever told. It is a story of a plane crash that should have killed everyone, an avalanche that buried them alive, and a decision that proved that when the body is starving, the soul will do anything to keep the heart beating. If you are fascinated by the extreme limits of human endurance and the moral dilemmas of the death zone, please hit that subscribe ** button right now. You need to hear this story because it reminds us that deep down, the will to live is the most powerful force in the universe. October 12, 1972. The mood on the plane was electric. It was a chartered flight carrying the Old Christians, rugby team from Montevideo, Uruguay, to a match in Santiago, Chile. These were young men, 19, 20, 21 years old. They were fit, wealthy, and full of life. They brought their families. They brought their friends. There were 45 people on board. They were playing cards. They were throwing a rugby ball down the aisle. They were laughing. They thought it was just a weekend trip. But the pilot made a fatal error. They were flying through the Andes Mountains in bad weather. The clouds were thick. The pilot believed he had already crossed the mountains and was descending into Chile. He radioed the tower, requesting descent. He was wrong. He wasn't over the valley. He was still in the middle of the peaks. He lowered the plane, straight into a wall of rock. The impact was catastrophic. The right wing struck a mountain ridge. It snapped off. The propeller sliced through the fuselage like a knife. The tail broke off, sucking passengers out into the void. The left wing snapped off. The fuselage, now just a metal tube, hit a steep snow slope. It became a toboggan. It slid down the glacier at 200 miles per hour. It crashed into a snowbank at the bottom of the valley. The seats concertinaed forward, crushing the people in the front. When the snow settled, the silence was deafening. 12 people were dead instantly. Many more were badly injured, broken legs, punctured lungs, steel shrapnel in their stomachs. Nando Parrado, a 21-year-old student, was in a coma. His mother was dead. His sister was dying. Roberto Canessa, a 19-year-old medical student, immediately went into doctor mode. He began checking the survivors. They were trapped at 11,800 feet. It was freezing. They had no winter clothes. They were wearing blazers and loafers. They had no food, just a few chocolate bars and some wine. They huddled in the wrecked fuselage, using luggage to block the gaping hole in the back. They thought, we just have to wait. They will find us tomorrow. Day 1 passed, day 2 passed. They saw planes flying high overhead. They tried to signal. They wrote SOS with lipstick on the fuselage roof. It was too small. They tried to burn luggage. The fire wouldn't light in the thin air. The planes didn't see them. The white fuselage blended perfectly into the snow. On day 11, they found a small transistor radio in the luggage. They managed to get it working. They huddled around it to listen to the news, expecting to hear about the rescue operation. Instead, they heard the announcer say, "The search for the missing Uruguayan plane has been called off. Authorities will wait until the snow melts in January to recover the bodies." Imagine that moment. The world had given up on them. Their families were holding funerals. They were ghosts. One of the survivors, Gustavo Nikolic, turned to the group and said, "Hey guys, I have good news." "What good news?" they shouted. "They called off the search." "The good news," Gustavo said, "is that now we have to get out of here on our own." But before they could get out, they had to survive. The food was gone. They had eaten the toothpaste. They had eaten the leather strips from the luggage. They were starving. Their bodies were consuming themselves. Nando Parrado looked at Roberto Canessa. They looked at the snow outside. Preserved in the ice just a few yards away were the bodies of their friends. It was a taboo thought, a nightmare thought. But Nando spoke it. "If I die," Nando said, "I want you to use my body to survive. I give you permission." They made a pact, a spiritual and legal contract. "If I die, you can eat me." They reasoned it was like Holy Communion, the body and blood of Christ given to save others. Roberto, the medical student, took a piece of glass. He went out to the bodies. He cut small strips of frozen flesh. He laid them on the metal roof to dry in the sun. He forced himself to swallow. It was tasteless, it was cold, but it was life. One by one, the survivors broke the taboo. They chose to live. Just as they were adapting to their new reality, the mountain struck again. October 29, day 17. It was night. Everyone was sleeping inside the fuselage. Suddenly, a roar like a freight train. An avalanche. A massive wall of snow crashed into the fuselage. It buried them. The plane was filled to the ceiling with snow. They were suffocating in the dark. Those who were awake, frantically, dug out the faces of the others. But 8 more people died that night, including the team captain, Marcelo Perez, including the last strong leaders. For 3 days, the survivors were trapped inside the buried plane, under the snow, with the bodies of the newly dead. The oxygen was running out. They had to poke a metal pole through the roof to make an air hole. They realized they were truly in hell. Weeks turned into months. Weakness claimed more lives. Numatur Caddy, the heart of the group, died of infection. They realized they couldn't wait anymore. The snow wasn't melting fast enough. Someone had to walk out. Nando Parrado said, "I am going." Roberto Canessa said, "I am going with you." And a third visitant joined them. They prepared for the trek. They made a sleeping bag out of the insulation from the plane's tail. They stored up extra rations, human flesh wrapped in socks. On December 12, day 61, they started climbing. Their goal was the mountain wall to the west. The pilot had said they were close to Chile. They thought if they climbed that wall, they would see green valleys on the other side. The climb was brutal. They were climbing a 15,000-foot peak in rugby shoes. It took 3 days just to reach the top. Nando reached the summit first. He expected to see the green valleys of Chile. Instead, he saw mountains, endless white, jagged peaks in every direction. They were nowhere near the edge. They were in the middle of the Andes. It was a moment of total despair. Vizintin gave his food to Nando and Roberto and slid back down to the crash site to save rations. Nando looked at Roberto. "We are dead men," Roberto said. Nando looked at the horizon. "I may die," he said, "but I will die walking toward the west." "You and me, Nando," Roberto said. "We are friends, we go together." For 10 days they walked. They climbed glaciers, they jumped crevasses, they slept in holes in the snow. They were fueled by frozen meat and pure adrenaline. Slowly the landscape changed. The snow disappeared, rocks appeared. Then grass. Then a lizard. Then a cow. They realized they had made it out of the death zone. On the 9th day of the trek, they were by a river. They saw a man on a horse on the other side. They screamed, they fell to their knees. The man couldn't hear them over the river noise. He threw a rock with a piece of paper and a pencil tied to it. Nando wrote a note. "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. I have 14 friends wounded on the plane. Please help us." He threw the rock back. The man, a Chilean farmer named Sergio Catalan, read it. He signaled, "Wait." He rode his horse for 10 hours to the nearest police station. The next day, the sound of chopping blades filled the valley. Helicopters. Nando Parrado guided them back to the crash site. Imagine the scene at the fuselage. The 14 survivors heard the helicopters. They dragged themselves out into the snow. They were skeletal, they were filthy. But they were cheering. They were saved. It was December 22, 1972. They had been on the mountain for 72 days. When they arrived at the hospital, the press went wild. But the survivors were nervous. They knew they had to tell the truth about the food. They held a press conference. One of them stood up and quoted the Bible. "Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." They explained the pact. There was silence and then understanding. The Catholic Church absolved them. The families of the dead forgave them. They were not judged as monsters. They were judged as heroes who did the unthinkable to survive. The story of the Andes survivors is the ultimate testament to the human spirit. It wasn't individual survival like 127 hours. It was collective survival. They took care of the wounded. They built a society in the snow. They evolved. Nando Parrado lost his mother and sister in the crash, but he gained 15 brothers. It is a gone wrong story because of the pilot's error, a single mistake that cost 29 lives. But it is a survival story because of the decision to walk. Nando Parrado walked 38 miles across the Andes in street shoes. Mountaineers today, with modern gear, find that route difficult. He did it while starving. Every year on December 22nd, the survivors gather. They bring their children and their grandchildren. They call them the children of the mountain. Because if they hadn't eaten the dead, if they hadn't climbed that wall, none of those future generations would exist. They proved that life always finds a way. Even in the cold, even in the dark. Even when all you have left is each other. This story is profound. The moment they realized they had to eat their friends is one of the darkest moments in human history, but also one of the most resilient. Would you have been able to break that taboo to survive, or would you have chosen to die? It's a question we all hope we never have to answer. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are moved by the miracle of the Andes, please hit that asterisk like asterisk asterisk button and subscribe asterisk asterisk. I have a story coming next week about a man who was lost in the jungle for 3 weeks and had to pull worms out of his own skin to survive. Stay safe, hug your friends, and never stop walking toward the Green Valley.